Good evening, this is Eric Cecil, back again to read some poems. The poems I'm going to read tonight come from the book, The Lifting of the Veil. In this book, it reveals that the Spirit of God is female in gender, is feminine in nature. This takes a look at a specific section of a writing called Conscience Alone that I go into some detail about writing and then about kind of the symbolism and things that are in it. The title, The Lifting of the Veil, comes from the word apocalypse, which is a Greek word, and the Greek word actually means the lifting of the veil. It means that something is hidden and it's been revealed and the veil lifts. It's also, of course, apocalypse means, which most people are familiar with, comes from the book of Revelation, which is written by, I think it's attributed to the Apostle John. He's on an island in Patmos. He's been exiled and he has visions, and it's a highly symbolic book. It's the Revelation is highly symbolic. It's not to be taken literally, and it was written for that time period when there was a lot of oppressions against Christians. It's not really, as far as I'm concerned, very applicable to the things today, going on today, although you see a lot of the violence and things like that that are today. I personally am of the belief that that this age of violence is not going to end in violence, that there'll be a peaceful conclusion, and then days of peace following that conclusion, whatever that looks like. That, of course, it doesn't fall in line with what is typically thought, but I just have a hard time believing that victory for God is that, as the book of Revelation describes, like a third of humanity is wiped out in apocalyptic war, and I just don't see how that's a winning scenario, basically. So this first poem is a poem that I think is the beginning of the book. Is at the beginning, and it's titled Prayer. I'm afraid. I can't. I give up. Quit my finite. I can't accomplish what I want. I am an insufficient power. My thoughts and plans consist of schemes and timely manipulations. If God will just show up when and where I want him. I look and eye the rocks below. My lungs fill with chaos. My hope fades. I jump and feel the darkness destroying me. God help me. My mind stops peering around the corner of tomorrow. My heart stops listening to the doubts of my mind. I stop suffering, feeling fear of failure. But it passes. And I can't. I'm afraid. I feel the surety of my fear. It envelops me. I call out to God. I wait and suffer and hope. This is my life. So in this book, it's referred to, God is referred to as he. Of course, at the end of the book, it was kind of the last poem in something that I wasn't expecting, but in the last part of the book, God's referred to as female. So in the next book, The Song of the Spirit, and really after that, I've referred to God as her or she. But in this book, God's still referred to as he. This next poem is called Wes Montgomery. He's one of my favorite jazz musicians. He's a great guitarist. And if you're interested in hearing a great jazz guitarist, he's probably at the top of the list. Wes Montgomery. I come home some winter days, fix hot chocolate, and let Wes Montgomery spin on the stereo, melt into the couch, and contemplate the spiritual health of society. I turn on the space heater, listen to Wes, and ponder if there's a limit to God's grace. I have hope for the human race. I close my eyes, breathe, exhausted, coming to the end of the Obama administration's first term, and it's not the appropriate time for self-pitying, saying, I wish poetry were easier, not so heart-wrenching, and didn't entail so many Saturday nights spent alone in front of a muted television with football on, the stereo playing forgotten songs. I'm not interested in talking about humanity, or writing or elaborating on what I've written, or stepping into the limelight, or making pretentious statements about art. It's just words on a page. It's only poetry. I still write now and then, but not all at once, all the time. These days, I'd rather stay home, listen to jazz, or run the vacuum, do the dishes, do laundry, or clean the bathroom. So the writing of this book was a lot different, the process. Before, the way that I would write a poem is I would write it kind of all at once and finish it and just focus on that one poem. But with this book, I wrote probably 40 or 50 poems and just kind of tinkered with them here and there and didn't rush to finish them. Just kind of, I kind of thought of it as like going to my workshop, is, just tinkering around, fixing some poems here and there, working on them a little bit at a time. So it was a little bit different, the process of writing this book. This book is about forgiveness, and it's actually titled Forgiveness. It's about being harmed as a child and forgiveness. And this was a long process. The idea of forgiveness is not, for me, an instantaneous thing that, oh, someone's harmed me, so I just forgive them right there on the spot. For me, it's a process. It can be a long process. And that was certainly the case with this. Forgiveness. I never felt normal and don't believe that I had a normal childhood and definitely never had a normal adolescence. And normal is a setting on a washing machine, so I mean that I grew up spiritually sick, which grew into a deep self-hatred because I felt so outcast from the tribe and began to feel completely inferior right around puberty. My perception of self crumbled from the sexual violence. I prefer that term because it's more accurate and socially acceptable than molestation or abuse. The word molestation is so profane and vile, and it makes me feel profane and vile and shameful and dirty from just that word. When I first became aware that I had been exposed to this violence, molestation was used to describe what happened, and the event and word were so negatively powerful that I had felt I lost myself, and I felt like I would continue to lose parts of myself. I was so utterly hopeless and lost within the depression and psychosis that I felt like I could never recover from molestation, but I eventually began to recover from violence, even if it's to the soul, and the proof is that I can write about this and can talk about it. This ongoing recovery process is not complete, probably never will be complete, and I can live with that because I am changing. I'm not the same short, skinny, adolescent boy with the thick glasses and red hair, parted like I was running for vice president on the Republican side, who was so scared of life that only found comfort in books first, then alcohol and drugs. And for the man who harmed me, like no one has ever harmed me, I don't care about him. I'm indifferent. I'm too busy recovering from the residual effects of his actions to pay him much mind. I don't care if in his afterlife he resides in hidden Kentucky meadows, awakening with the sunrise and breathing condensation on the green grass of my ancestors. He is a mere shadow, quickly fading in the light of my awakened life. So, and later on, there was a closure that I wrote about in the book that I haven't talked about yet. It's called Love and Nothing Else. And there was kind of an event that was just like a complete closure for me. And that's in that book. It hadn't yet happened yet when I was writing this. So the lifting of the veil was kind of broken up into different categories. There's like one part of it is kind of about America, and part of it is kind of about the American church, how kind of dealing with fundamentalism and mega church kind of things. And so this is going into kind of the America part of the book. There's a part in the book about addiction. The God's Children was kind of about mental illness. This book, The Lifting of the Veil, kind of concerns itself at times more about addiction. But this is kind of about the America phase of it. It's called Glory Days. I was talking to someone about America and Walmart, and they talked about the glory days of the 50s and the material prosperity before manufacturing jobs got shipped overseas. I replied that the 50s must have been great if you were white, but if you were African American, you still lived in a segregated society where separate meant unequal, and the Civil Rights Act was a great ideal and dream, but it was never given the blueprint for economic justice. And what has really changed? In 2012, it still has to do with skin color, and wealth means being born in the right socioeconomic background. Poverty is generational, and if you're born poor in a world where 1/6 of humanity is hungry every night, you're likely to die barefoot and starving, with tears rolling down your face and flies and buzzards circling. The way that America will regain its soul is not by listening to the fanatics on the radio, but by reaching out to those who have slipped through the cracks, by strengthening social services and investing in education, because science and mathematics is our future. But this will never happen as long as pimply-faced boys die in wars to protect what boardrooms believe is theirs and not ours. I place my faith in the Almighty, who holds the promise of a sunrise breaking for a renewed world, who has love for redeemed people. Stars will dance as angels sing of fulfilled dreams, and poets will guide the conscience of systems of power so that blood is never again shed for the wants and whims of the few, while the needs of the many go unmet. This is a poem called Out of Gas. And my drinking and drug use, mostly marijuana use, really escalated in between August of 1999 and October of 2000. And it really got out of control. So this is called Out of Gas. In Lexington, on Sundays, the liquor stores closed, and you could only get a drink at a restaurant until 10:30 p.m. However, downtown there was a hotel with a bar inside called the Big Blue Martini where you could drink until 1 a.m. I got off work one night from serving tables, went to Applebee's, got started there, and left to get downtown. My gas light came on, but I opted out of getting gas. The Big Blue Martini was the place to be, and it would be hard to get a drink because the crowd crammed around the bar like pigs at the trough. I got to the bar, drank more than usual, so much so that the people I was with wouldn't let me drive home. I went back to someone's house, drank more, blacked out, and came to the next day. Someone gave me a ride back to the hotel garage. I found my car, drove it out onto the street, and it immediately ran out of gas. This occurred in January, and it was painfully cold as I walked to the gas station with an unbelievable hangover. I bought a red plastic container and filled it with some gas. I walked down the street, back to the car, smoking a cigarette. I passed two people walking down the street who pointed out that I was carrying gas and smoking a cigarette. I was in so much pain that I kept walking, smoking, carrying the gas because I couldn't have cared if I lived or died. And again, this is about the progression of alcoholism and addiction, and definitely the Y2K party is something that is always going to stick out in my head as a turning point in my drinking and use. Definitely it was a point where it's like, man, this alcohol is just killing me. It's destroyed everything good that's within. Progression. I was living with my roommates and going to a summer class at UK in 1999. I ran into a friend who was working as a busboy, dishwasher at Outback Steakhouse. I needed a job, so I started working there. People working in restaurants, in general, party. I fit right into the lifestyle with shifts starting in the afternoon and getting off late at night when the bars and clubs get going. My alcoholism progressed while working there, meaning this. I went to an Outback party in August, right before school started, right after I got hired. I made friends with a woman named Hope, presenting to her my character. She laughed as I made jokes. I played the jester, the court fool. I had to earn your love somehow. I got mildly intoxicated as I remember, had a great time, with a slight hangover the next day. And alcohol was a social lubricant. It was fun and still exciting. Alcohol made me happy. But something happened that I cannot explain, because 4 months later, alcohol and marijuana was physically, mentally, spiritually crushing me, cleaning me out. I was an empty bucket. The Y2K party was at Joy's house, a server at Outback, and it was well attended. And someone had a Kodak Polaroid. I was trying to avoid the camera as much as I could because I deeply, passionately hated myself. I could not stand to look at myself in the mirror to shave, which is why I wore a beard. Someone took my picture and I had to look at it, and I had to drink. I tried to look at the picture but turned away because I had 2 noses and 3 eyes and everyone was looking at me. I stood there looking at the Polaroid, humiliated. And I took another drink, and I was dead inside, decaying and rotting where myself used to be. Yeah, that was, will always stand out is the Y2K party and the change that happened. And that was in 2000, and I got sober in October of 2002, so another couple years with feeling like that. And this kind of deals with the American church, I suppose you could say, with kind of fundamentalism and actually fundamentalism, I don't know if most people know this, but fundamentalism is a relatively new phenomenon when it comes to Christianity. It began as a response to a famous trial called the Monkey Scopes trial in Tennessee. The trial was about evolution, and as kind of a response to the evolution, fundamentalism got started, where people started to believe in the literal um, words of the Bible. And previous to this, that was not the case. People looked at it and delved into it and said, this is symbolic, this is a story, this is real. I can't think of it, but there was a theologian that was asked if uh, if the Bible is true, and his response was, everything in the Bible is true, and some of it even really happened, meaning that you can tell truth without a literal story. It can just be a story. It can just be symbolic. It doesn't have to mean that it literally happened. So it's not, in a black and white thing with reading the Bible. Or at least that's how it was thought of before fundamentalism. And of course now it's like, we believe this is the literal truth of these things really happened. So anyways, kind of got off on a tangent there. But this is called Megachurch Blues. When I pulled myself out of it and started writing again, I have nothing left to give, and after waiting all these years to see the miracle on 34th Street, I was just worn thin. I just don't see the importance of it anymore. I don't get anything out of it. Nothing really inspires me. What's the point in this crazy world where fanatics get the press, when politician becomes God, pundits have their minions, and their youth are plugged in and mindless? What's the point? I turn on TBN and watch a fundamentalist preacher who I find a little deranged and slightly entertaining. I don't want to hurt his feelings and ruin his day, but God, who so loved the world, is not going to allow 1/3 of mankind die in some apocalyptic war. I'm not enough in his eyes, but I am in God's. So listen. I hear the message of megachurches, the health and wealth gospel of capitalistic Christianity, like we are here for God to serve us and give to us. A religion of let's make a deal and how can we cash in? Whatever happened to serving the poor? All right. This poem, again, is kind of dealing with religion, fundamentalism. It's called Apology. I always feel like I should apologize for my writings, like I should constantly begin with this. I'm sorry that my poetry makes you feel uncomfortable. I know that I should just tone it down and not be so concerned about war and humanity. I should not be troubled by the future of America and what our role is in the world. I apologize for not selling for second best for my country. We have more to offer than military might, and I am sorry for thinking this. If I've made you uneasy, for being hopeful, certain that armed conflicts will end, and it won't come through diplomats working at the UN, but through God's grace, I'm sorry. And if I offended you for mentioning God, I'm sure he is issuing his own statement of apology, because he doesn't quite live up to your standards. You know, his whole unwavering, unconditional love thing, that inconvenient, I'm not going to leave you no matter what attitude of his. It seems like he sides with the poor a little too much and has unwarranted concerns about the sick. So he apologizes for all the sermons that he ruins on Sundays, especially when certain preachers get going about Muslims and gay people and the people who don't pay income taxes like the disabled and the people in jails and prisons. Perhaps the most unfortunate aspect of God writing his apologies every week is that he has to write so many. Okay, so this will be the last writing from the lifting of the veil, and the book was designed to be 3 books within a book. I know that's a little strange, but that's just how I conceptualized it. And so this is the epilogue of the book up until book 3. And it's about, I think to me, it's about the spiritual experience, and it's also about the night my sister died. Epilogue. I know that he is with me, that he lives within my spirit. I didn't always believe this or know this. I was agnostic for much of my life, and God was irrelevant. But despite my lack of knowledge, God has always been with me, and he was always with you. Where else could he be? Perhaps I can best tell you about God's plan and presence with this story. My sister passed away on May 26, 1995. I got ready for high school that morning. I walked into the family room as I had done in the days and weeks previous. I checked if she was still breathing. She was, but just barely, as she had a death rattle caused by water filling her lungs. I went to school and had always envisioned that the guidance counselor would pull me out of class and I would have to go home. It would have been very dramatic, I'm sure, but nothing happened during the day. When I got home, there was a lot of family and friends at the house, as there had been. At that point, we were strangely concerned, not about Molly living, but in her dying, in her suffering to finally be alleviated. So the hospital nurse was telling us that in some cases, people need a little privacy to pass, and that since she is surrounded by a lot of people, that it might be best if some people left. Perhaps in retrospect, we would have done things differently. But because of this advice, my brother went to work, and I decided that I would go out that night with friends because we wanted to give her some space. My brother worked right up the street, and if something happened, he could be there in 5 minutes. This was before cell phones, but I had a pager, which was actually my sister's, and if something happened, my parents could page me. So I went out with friends that Friday night, mindful that I could be paged and would get home if something happened. We ended up at Denny's. My parents knew this is where I would be because that was where my friends and I hung out. While there, I got a little nervous and decided to call home. The phone was strangely busy, which caused some alarm. I went back to the table with my friends and sat down. A few minutes later, a waitress came over and asked for Eric Cecil. She said that I had a phone call. It was my dad, and he told me to come home and to drive carefully. I knew, even though he didn't say it, that she had died. I told my friends that I had to go. My friend Carrie insisted that she go with me, that I could drop her off at Kmart on the way. I numbly agreed. Looking back, she just didn't want me to be alone, so she accompanied me until Kmart. I dropped her off there and hit the gas. I was almost home, speeding through my neighborhood. About a mile before I got home, blue and red lights started flashing. I was probably doing 45 in a 25. I honestly thought about not pulling over, but I did. The police officer got out of his car and said, "This must be your lucky night." He paused dramatically, and it seemed like all the air got sucked out of the universe. I couldn't believe the cruelty. He then said that his radar gun was not turned on and that he would have to let me go. I explained that I was trying to get home because my sister had just died. He let me go, and I drove the final mile home. I jumped out of my car, ran down the drive, and into the house. Everyone was there waiting for me. I looked at her body and immediately saw that she wasn't breathing. My brother came from behind me, turned me, and we hugged and cried. I'll always remember that night. But what sticks out to me today were the words of the police officer. This must be your lucky night. I asked my sister to watch over me when she was on her deathbed. Several years later, of course, I embarked on a journey of recovery. But before I could start this journey, I had to go down my own path, which included a high-speed police chase. I saw the lights flashing behind me, and that time, I continued to drive, endangering everyone on that highway. Considering the countless blessings that have followed, that was my lucky night, when I believed that my sister's presence was especially strong in protecting her baby brother. That's why it's important to have some type of higher power, some type of conception of God, to see the connections, to form the relationship. I know that in one of my darkest hours, when my sister died, when I was pulled over for speeding, that God was with me, even though I didn't understand. I didn't recognize his voice. He was with me again, speeding again, and it would only be years later, with days of reflection, before I realized that my lucky night was over 7 years deferred. Okay, so that's it for the night, and let me find how to turn off the phone. So I have a couple more books to read from, and